Avi Lewis, thank you for making the time.
Great to be here.
Listen, I'm going to begin with the tough questions first.
Why not?
Yeah, why not? Just get them out of the way.
Let's go there.
But beginning with the obvious, you do not right now have a seat in the House of Commons. You've never held public office. You've tried, but you've never held public office.
Yeah.
What makes you qualified to lead a federal party that's trying to rediscover and reignite its relevance?
I think a little outsider energy has been helpful. I mean, obviously, I'm a child of the 1970s NDP, and I grew up in the party. I don't think I lack for a background in party culture. But I think this is an extraordinary moment in the life of our party, and we've been reduced to, a handful of seats and the end of an era. From 2011 and the breakthrough of the Orange Wave, it's sort of been down and down and down. And so this is a time of rebirth. It's a time of reimagining. It's a time of reinvigorating our base and our grassroots. And I just don't think that there is no continuity. There's no, before. We are at a crossroads. And I think fresh ideas and the kind of ideas that our campaign has brought into this race really resonated with members and have become, for us, the source of energy and momentum, more so than traditional questions of, administrative record and stuff like that. But I tried a couple times. I ran in seats that had never been NDP seats before, so I tried to put new seats in play. The last election was a bit of a black swan election by most accounts, and we certainly felt things shift as people voted out of fear of Trump. And the progressive vote with Poilievre as the kind of avatar for Trump. Mm-hmm. So that was a unique circumstance. But hey, I lost a couple of times, and I hope we've got the ideas on our campaign that's going to reignite the party.
And you noted these were ridings, and we're talking 2021, Vancouver West, Sunshine Coast, Sea to Sky. Yep. 2025, Vancouver Centre. These are ridings that have not gone to the NDP, but
ever.
Arguably, it's a metaphor of the national challenge that the NDP faces. It's often said there's no safe NDP seat in the country. So you ran twice, you came in third in both those times.
Yeah.
What do you actually know about running a winning campaign?
Well, I think the last campaign in Vancouver Centre, to be honest, Michael, was the campaign of my dreams. We knocked on more than 50,000 doors. We had 800 volunteers. We saw Hedy Fry, our opponent's leaflets in 4 or 5 buildings. Vancouver Centre, as you know, is a unique riding with 1,000 buildings and fewer than 100 single-family homes. So we're the only riding without lawn signs. But we were in 600 of those buildings, and we didn't see any signs of the other campaigns. So I think we had an extraordinary campaign in terms of volunteer energy and actually knocking on the doors and talking to thousands and thousands and thousands of voters. And I think it really wasn't the NDP's election for a lot of reasons. So I think we would have had a shot. If it had been a change election of the kind we had been anticipating, Hedy Fry had been there for 32 years at that point. People did want change. It just in the fear moment, they didn't, they went for Carney.
Okay, you have a shot, but is that enough when this party can ill afford another 2025? Quite frankly, whenever the next federal election happens, it becomes an existential vote for the NDP.
It is an existential vote for the NDP, and I think that's what makes me excited about participating in the race. I can't change the electoral record, and if having a seat already were a requirement for getting elected leader, then Jagmeet wouldn't have been elected leader because he didn't have a federal seat, and Jack wouldn't have been elected leader because he didn't have a federal seat. And so, we come to this as we come, and I think it's going to be up to the members to decide who has the vision that can really take us into the next chapter. And I appreciate Heather's record tremendously. I've got a ton of respect for Heather McPherson. She's been a fantastic foreign affairs critic and a great MP. And if the ballot question for people is, do you already have a seat? She's got it locked up. I don't think that's how the NDP members are going to choose in this epic moment of a new direction for our party.
Okay, what would you have done differently then? In 2025, you described it as this black swan moment, and it's the shared analysis. Donald Trump changed the calculus of that election greatly. The entrance of Mark Carney changed the calculus of that greatly. But what would you have done? Had you been leader, how would you have reacted to those external events to change the outcome for your party?
I think that what was missing was a grand vision of how Canada stands up to Trump. And I think we've developed this on our campaign. And I have a pretty clear idea now of what I think it is. But at that moment, I don't think when the writ dropped, I don't think most Canadians saw the NDP as viable in that existential moment for our country. And I think that's just what it was. But I think the election campaign, if there were any opening for us in the 2025 election campaign, it would have been to assert a really clear vision for how Canada could be run differently to protect us from Trump. And I think that Canadians then, as now, want an independent Canadian economy. And that means not doubling down on shipping off raw resources or trying to build 5% of our economy into military spending and be a major arms exporter. I think it actually means using the vast resources and the public and private wealth of this country to invest in confronting the cost of living crisis and directly fixing the major emergency in the lives of working class Canadians and Canadian majority.
Okay, you mentioned a lot. I'm going to get to hopefully all of them, but I'm going to begin with the cost of living challenge.
Yeah.
Because in the video that launched your campaign, you noted the fact that yes, Donald Trump is this big threat, but you identify as a bigger threat, and this is the quote, the bigger threat being the everyday emergency of trying to get by in an impossible economy. And to get through that, you propose things like a public developer to essentially address the housing crisis, a public option for telcos to address things like the high cost of internet, a public option for groceries. Why lean in on a public option on these multiple fronts?
Well, I think what we have in Canada, and this is what, and we've been able to tell a story during our campaign that only the NDP can tell, to help Canadians understand why life is so hard. People are working so hard, Michael. You know that people are taking on extra jobs, and it just never seems to be enough. And we're sobbing at the checkout of the grocery store because prices are so high. Meanwhile, we have 5 big grocery chains that control 80% or more of that market. We have 3 telecoms companies that control that market. We have 6 big banks that made $70 billion in profit in 1 year last year. So Canadians see all of this wealth stuck at the top with a handful of corporations dominating every sector. And this, I believe this is a case of market failure. We've left everything to the market. The government does not enforce competition. It allows effective monopolies. They collude, they price fix, and they have rigged the game against ordinary Canadians who cannot pay their bills.
But are you just punishing companies, the Canadian success stories? Because at the end of the day, these are corporate entities that employ thousands of people.
A Canadian success story doesn't gouge people, doesn't raise prices above inflation, doesn't relentlessly extract profits when people are suffering. There are reasonable levels of profit.
Is that the government's role to undermine private entrepreneurship?
It is the government's role to make sure that Canadians can lead a dignified life when they work their butts off. And right now, that is impossible for most people. And what we're actually calling for is the government to step up and actually intervene when the market is failing to provide the basics of life, food, shelter, healthcare, communication, at a price that people can actually afford. And that means the public option has been used many times in our history. There have been many crown corporations. In Saskatchewan, there is still a public phone company. And until recently, the private phone providers in Saskatchewan lowered their prices, in some cases 40%, and still made a profit, Michael. Responsible entrepreneurs still made a profit when there was a public option that actually kept the market competitive. And people pay much less for their cell phones. That's why if you have a friend from Saskatchewan, they still have a Sask number because they keep their SaskTel, because that's a precious thing. And we need that for housing, and we need that for food.
Okay, but these public options, everything is going to cost money. The last projection for fiscal 25-26, when it comes to the federal deficit, is $78 billion. Are you comfortable with increasing that deficit? Does your idea necessitate accepting a higher deficit?
When Prime Minister Carney is in this hallowed seat with you, Michael, I hope you ask him whether $470 billion of new defense spending in the next decade is viable with a deficit and a financial situation.
I'll get to that in a second, but are you willing? No, I'll get to that in a second, but are you willing to increase the deficit for these priorities?
We have costed our version of a public option for groceries. It is 50 warehouse-style stores, so not with 25 or 30,000 SKUs and different products, 1,500 to 2,000 basics, not 75 flavors of salad dressing. 50 stores, like warehouse stores, Costco, plus local. 6 or 7 regional distribution hubs, paying farmers and food producers more than they're getting from the big 5 grocery chains, and cutting the cost of groceries for consumers 30 to 45%. Now, the government, in our version, should subsidize the stores, the land, the gross margin of the stores, what they call in the industry, the land, the electricity, and the unionized workforce. I would like to see United Food and Commercial Workers, who are the union for most grocery store workers across the country, represent those workers in this store. It would cost around $300 million to set up, and would cost around $300 million a year.
Okay,
that is 1/2 of 1% of our current defense budget. Okay. It is a rounding error in the government's budget, but it introduces competition into the market, and it introduces a place where Canadians can get affordable groceries. I do not think it will have an impact on the deficit. Certainly not compared to other big spending plans that the government already has.
Okay, and you point to defense spending as a definite.
I mean, it's a gigantic one that the Prime Minister dropped on us recently.
And I hear you. It is a big cost line item in terms of cost, but it is in response to NATO and national defense, and NATO asking every member nation, member country to increase their contribution to meet what was always the goal and to meet a future goal to increase security needs. Yeah. Would you have ignored that call from NATO?
No. Look, we've gone well beyond that, right? The Defense Industrial Strategy that Prime Minister Carney released a couple of weeks ago goes way beyond the 2%. And he has immediately introduced a goal of 5%, which nobody but Donald Trump has ever raised. So we are going all in on spending on weapons and war in a way that I think Canadians are scared right now. It's a very scary moment. The world is volatile, especially with this illegal war of aggression that's been launched by the United States and Israel, which is destabilizing the world right now. And so people are naturally scared. I believe we need a modern military. We absolutely need to be able to defend ourselves. But I think that's not what we're talking about when we're talking about the current plans for a gigantic increase in defense spending. 5% of our GDP that Carney's talking about spending on defense within a decade is equivalent to the entire education system from pre-K to postdoc. Do Canadians really understand that that's what we're talking about? Because that government has not been transparent or even provided a vision and a plan of what 5% of our entire economy is supposed to accomplish. So I think there's a mismatch in terms of people are ready to do big things in Canada, and I think that's great. We need nation-building projects. We need a Canadian shield to Trump-proof our economy. I believe that should be done by directly addressing the cost of living crisis and not by doubling down on exporting raw resources or turning Canada into a major arms exporter in a dangerous world with a lot of bad actors and not very good customers.
Okay. You also want to bring about a Green New Deal. It includes investing 2% of GDP into climate initiatives, 1% of that essentially earmarked to creating jobs in this country.
Yeah.
It includes, and this is a quick summation because we're running out of time,
sure.
The job creation, free transit, heat pumps for everyone, power lines, not pipelines, as you say. Mm-hmm. To help pay for it, though, you would essentially apply an export tax on fuel resourced here in Canada and sold to the United States.
Yeah.
Do you
That's not the only measure. I mean, that's one part of our
one measure.
Tax
but the reason why I point to that is that the Alberta Premier has been very clear. She will push back on any federal tax, export tax on products coming out of her province. Do you risk national unity, exacerbating problems on national unity by pursuing that type of tax on oil and resources?
Well, I think if you look at what the United States has done and the quixotic tariffs that just come and then they go and then they come back twice as big and you never know what you're going to wake up and find from the Trump administration, the one product which is our major export to the United States, which has not been nearly as affected as steel, automotive, and everything else, is oil and gas. Because whatever Donald Trump says about not wanting Canadian oil and gas, we're one of the major producers of bitumen of heavy oil in the world. Most of the world's capacity for refining bitumen is in the Gulf Coast of the United States. They've they've made those refineries for our product. They need it and they want it. So if there's one thing that we've got, the huge percentage of our product that we ship directly to the United States, we should be putting an export tax on that. Because
even if it risks national unity with Alberta?
Well, obviously there would be conversations with Alberta in a plan like that, but I think Canadians, as Canadians, agree that we need to fight back against the United States. And we don't have many mechanisms by which we can do it. And this question of an export tax on oil and gas is something that the Americans would not like. But it is actually something that they need, and it's a point of leverage, and I think we should be using it to generate revenue in our country.
Okay. On the matter of national unity, Quebec could be faced with another sovereignty referendum if the Parti Québécois elected. To be fair, of all the candidates, your French level is probably the best.
Merci bien. Je travaille très fort pour ça.
But at the same time, you yourself admit that there's work to be done on your fluency.
Sure.
How can you champion Canada in the next referendum if your fluency in French is not to par?
Well, I think, so first of all, Quebecers are going to decide. And I think back to the 1995 election because it was the longest broadcast night of my life. I covered it for Much Music, Michael, and we prepared a 90-minute show, semi-scripted, mostly spontaneous, and then I was on the air alone in a bar in Montreal with a few guests for 7 hours. It was the longest television night of my life.
At least it was a bar.
It was, yes, yes, although the drinking was after we were finally off the air. But yeah, these are incredible moments. I don't think there's a referendum in the offing, but that those rallies for the no and the please stay in Canada, I'm not sure that had the effect that everybody hoped. It was a razor thin vote, and I think the conditions were far more than the Canada persuading Quebec to stay. I'm not even sure that
So is there no role for the federal NDP, or you think it should be provincial parties decide the next referendum in Quebec?
No, well, I mean, I think Quebecers will decide the next referendum in Quebec, and I think there needs to be respect.
In terms of the campaigning?
No, I mean, I think the federal NDP has an opportunity to grow back in Quebec because there is a progressive majority in Quebec, the strongest labor movement in the country, and a progressive consensus. You know, a province that has said no to pipelines many, many times in a way that other provinces hadn't, where the consensus is climate action is a real priority for Quebecers. There's a lot that we have in common. We need to build back our presence in Quebec by having our Quebec section set the agenda and not dictating things from Ottawa, which is the worst thing you can do when you're trying to influence Quebec. So our strategy is to build back in Quebec, rooted in Quebec and in our members and activists in Quebec, and they will lead in a referendum in a way that makes sense to them. And I think dictating from the outside is not the greatest look, to be honest.
Okay, listen, before we're done, I want to get back to Donald Trump, because as you know, right now CUSMA is being reviewed, and by July the decision has to be made. Amend it, extend it, kill it, essentially. You yourself say that you grew up at the time, or your political awakening happened at a time that forces were campaigning against free trade.
Yeah.
What would your advice be, if you were to be the NDP leader, as to how this country should move forward with CUSMA?
Well, we have a crisis in our auto industry, which is the result of NAFTA, the free trade agreement before it, which has so tightly integrated our automotive market. And I think about the Unifor workers who are so vulnerable. And our government has tried throwing hundreds of millions of dollars at the big three automakers who take the money and then go back to the States. So what we really need, and I think that workers understand this, is we need an independent Canadian automotive industry. We're not going to get it through CUSMA. Right? We actually need to do it under public ownership. And when GM takes hundreds of millions of dollars and abandons workers and factories like they have done in Ingersoll and other places, we should be taking those plants into public ownership and continuing production to keep those lines moving.
So you'd buy them or nationalize them?
You know, it depends on the situation. When GM has taken $500 million and gone bye-bye with it, I'm not sure that we negotiate the sale price in exactly the same way. But I do know that the CUSMA negotiations, there's no harm in negotiating and trying to get the best deal. We should do what we can with our eyes open that the status quo, as the Prime Minister said in Davos, as Trump indicates every single day, the status quo is shredded. And our auto industry is extremely vulnerable. So we need to, keep on the same path and hope that things go back to normal. But that's not a plan. We actually need a plan for an independent automotive sector. And I think about the days of the Auto Pact, when if they wanted to sell a car in Canada, they had to make one here. So let's talk to automakers around the world and establish production with Canadian union labor in Canada, right? If China wants to sell vehicles here, if other countries want to sell a vehicle, they got to make them here. And let's start building an industry that can stand on its own 2 feet with a much stronger role for public ownership.
Okay, last question. So overtime. But listen, but before we're done, I do want to talk about the fact that right now the United States is engaged in a war against Iran.
Thank you.
And immediately, not long afterwards, we heard the Prime Minister support the action, in his words, because it prevented Iran from gaining a nuclear weapon, that it essentially prevented the regime from threatening further international peace and security. He added to that days later that the backing came with regret. The fact is it was sad because it just pointed to another failure of the rules-based international order. What do you make the Prime Minister's response? What would you say would have been the appropriate response?
I think it's been regrettable and it's been incoherent. As you point out, it keeps shifting. And I think you left out the most disturbing part, which is that the Prime Minister will not rule out Canadian forces being sent into an illegal war of aggression started by a country, Israel, which is still currently conducting a genocide in Gaza, still using starvation as a weapon of war, and another country, the United States, that has threatened us with annexation. To stand up for international law as Canadians means to denounce this reckless, dangerous war, which has plunged the region, the most volatile region in the world, into chaos and conflict and destruction. 165 people killed, most of them school children, in an AI-directed strike in the first hours of the war. And the Prime Minister is talking about the threat of nuclear weapons from Iran? There's no credible threat whatsoever. The International Atomic Energy Agency has said they're years away. Trump claims to have obliterated, with Israel's help, the nuclear capacity of Iran just last June. So it was disturbing to see the Prime Minister cite that as a reason to full-throatedly support an illegal war. And if we were to ever send Canadian forces into that theater, we would risk them being indicted for war crimes and crimes against humanity. We should be pursuing justice in the International Criminal Court and the International Court of Justice for this illegal war, not tap dancing around whether or not we will join it. I think Canadians are waiting for a clear moral statement from the Prime Minister that says this is reckless, it is unnecessary. The regime in Iran can be as evil as you think it is, but it is not for foreign assassinations and airstrikes to change the balance of forces in Iran. The people of Iran were massacred in the thousands, maybe tens of thousands, in the last wave of protests and standing up. That's what we should be supporting, not regime change from the outside. It has never ended well, and Canadians don't believe in that path.
Avi Lewis, thank you for the time.
Thank you, Michael.